I've learned not to be so certain. When I started out as a young therapist, I was pretty clear. I knew what was what and what people should do. I came from a family, my mother's script, she knew what was what and what people should do. And I caught a bit of that. And there have been other people who've helped me with that as well, including colleagues who say, John, you're seeming a bit certain about yourself. Oh, drat. Not again.
Hello and welcome. I'm Abby. This is Stories Lived, Stories Told. And today I invite you to join me in a previously recorded conversation that was originally released in October 2022, but certainly worth coming back to today. This conversation is with John Burnham, and we're taking a communication perspective on many, many things that he has learned as a systemic therapist. To take a communication perspective is to consider what we're making and how we're making it through our communication practices. This means we look closely at patterns, context, stories, and relationships, and that we use curiosity, mindfulness, collaboration, and dialogue to create better social worlds. So whether the topic of today's conversation is familiar to you or not, the hope is that using a communication perspective reveals new ways of seeing and being for all of us. At the top of the episode, you heard our conversation partner today, John Burnham. John Burnham is a consultant systemic psychotherapist and supervisor with over 40 years of experience working with families, couples, and individuals. What you'll hear today is a conversation that John and I recorded and released in October 2022. I love this conversation, and going back, I can see so clearly how a lot of John's ideas took root for me after this conversation and still influence the way I approach CMM and my relationships in this podcast too. One note I'll make is that you will get to hear some of that old music that I used during season 1 in this podcast. I just did such a good job of integrating it into this episode that I couldn't get it out when I went back to recontextualize this episode for this. So you will hear the current music I use in the middle of this episode, which will indicate where I had originally split this episode into 2 parts. And you'll also hear it obviously right now and at the end of the episode. I just thought I'd say that in case it threw you off to hear that other music. And I really don't think I need to say a lot else. John is really wise, and there's so much to learn in this conversation. So I'm really glad to be able to re-share this conversation as part of this series about relationships, and especially because this theme features a lot of great conversation with therapists. So let's wrap up this month of really, really meaningful conversations with John. John, thanks so much for being here.
Thank you for inviting me.
Well, one of the questions I want to start with, since most of our conversation today is going to be you sharing your stories with us, because that's, as you know, a big part of CMM is the storytelling that we do. And so part of my kind of thesis for this podcast is that I want this to be a space where people can learn to share their stories as well as feel heard and hear other people's stories, because I don't believe everyone has always had the space to share their stories. I think people have lots of thoughts and feelings and ideas about their lives and the stories they experience and what happens to them and what they make happen, but they haven't had the space. So this is about that space. So I wanted to ask you, how comfortable do you feel telling your story? Have you had spaces that made you feel safe to tell your story, or have you received messages that kept you from telling your story, or maybe both in different contexts?
Well, I want to tell you 2 stories.
Please.
About that. One from a long time ago and one right up to present.
Okay.
One was when I was at school, and Sheila McNamee helped me to remember this. She said, John, when did you first become a storyteller? And I couldn't remember. And then about 2 months later, clicked, and I wrote to her. I said, I've remembered
Mm.
the answer to your question. She couldn't remember the question she'd asked. It just goes to show how questions live on, even if the person who asks the questions forgets the question.
Absolutely.
The person who was asked it often remembers it, and it lives on.
Mm-hmm.
And I was at school, and I'd been missing a lot of school, playing truant, and I was in danger of being expelled, or at least suspended. And I was called in to see the headmaster, and he said, well, what's this all about? And I told him a story about what things were going on at home, and my dad's drinking, and how that was affecting things, and so on and so forth, and how I had to do things. And so school became less important. I had to attend to other things, and told him this. And he sat and listened patiently. And at the end, he said, well, Burnham, he said, I don't know if a single word of that is true, but you do tell a good story. And I think maybe from then, I don't know if from then, but that sticks in my mind, the power of stories.
Yep.
Now, it was true.
Yes.
It was true. But I took a risk in telling him that.
Right. Absolutely.
I was working class background. I was living in a working class family then, and it was a very middle class school.
Mm-hmm.
So telling that story about your disclosing personal distress and things like this, I had been mocked by some of the teachers for that.
Wow. Yeah.
So I took a risk in telling him, and he didn't mock me with that. So the risk was worth taking, and but it did show the power of being able to present yourself in particular ways and through stories and so on. And that he didn't suspend or expel me. Not then, anyway. More recently, I wrote a chapter with Lizette Nolt called Taking the Plunge. Now, I don't know if you're familiar with the model I founded and then co-developed with Alison Roper Hall called the Social Graces.
Yeah, why don't you explain that a little for my listeners?
It relates to gender, geography, race, religion, age, ability, accent, appearance, class, culture, ethnicity, employment, sexuality, sexual orientation, spirituality, ... S, which stands for something else that we haven't.
Right.
But it was a way that I used to try to remember all of the different aspects of identity and so on. I've always used acronyms to help me remember things, and so that was one thing. And we talked about personal and social graces, and we wrote a chapter together, and she sent me, she's familiar with CMM and other social constructions ideas, she sent me about 10,000 words of theory, which were, I thought, well, she's done that bit, what can I contribute?
Mm-hmm.
And I sat down, and so this is a chapter in a book called Surviving Clinical Psychology Training. So this is for people in training.
Yes.
And I sat down one night and just wrote some of the experiences I'd had, something like the one I've just told you about, but more about that displayed my, at that time, ignorance, displayed my sexism, displayed the things that I was raised in and wasn't aware of. I thought, that's the way life is. I didn't question that.
Yeah.
And so I talked about that, and then talked about the process of unbecoming that through the people I met, the families I work with, the colleagues I work with, generous enough to listen to those and to question me about it and to help me to shift positions and open my eyes to things that I didn't think existed. Because I was raised in Newcastle, which at that time was a very monocultural. If we talk about cosmopolitan communication in CMM, it was very monocultural. And until I moved away from it geographically, that opened my eyes.
Right.
And so I talked about the experiences and the process of change. So I had to tell some stories which were people tend not to tell about. I think some people act as if they've always been woke.
Right. Yeah.
They've never had these ideas. I think for people of my generation,
it's just not true.
Possible. It's unlikely.
Yes.
And I think that's influenced by the way people are criticized for things that they said 20 years ago.
Right.
And so I took the risk of saying these things and then describing the process. I gave it to a colleague and she came back and said, John, I think people might be scared about what you've written, might be perturbed. That was after I'd done this, the hardest thing was not to edit.
Yes. That it makes sense. You want to paint yourself in the best light possible, but that might not be the full story. And I think people are tempted to do that, especially if they're writing or talking about themselves. But what I find is that the stories we most want to hear from other people are those really vulnerable ones where we messed up or we didn't get it right, but we learned from it. And I think people want that from other people, but find it hard to do.
Yeah.
We find it hard to do for ourselves.
Yeah. Yeah. I think so. People want transparency, but do they?
Right. Yes. Yeah. Because it can make them uncomfortable. It's like you said, to read, things that you said or thought, but could be a good kind of discomfort, one you would want to lean into. Yeah.
So I put in a reader alert. I said, this is not a cry for help.
Yes.
I put a little box, reader alert. This chapter is about how I process these things. And want to let people know that if you're concerned as a trainee about these thoughts and ideas, training is about working them through, not judging you whether you have them or not. I don't think it should be about judging people. That's their experience so far. How they move on with that and what they do with that is another matter. But until you let them out, they can influence you if you keep them quiet. But once they're spoken, it's easier. A nursing colleague of mine, who's now a family therapist, Mark Clegg, said, if it can be mentioned, you would say this to young people, if it can be mentioned, it can be managed.
Absolutely. I think that's really powerful. I just love putting language to things because the experience I've had, like I said, I studied communication. And so in my classes, I was getting all this language for this is how we talk about this conflict style, or this is a dynamic that can happen in families, or this is a pattern that happens in interpersonal relationships. And it wasn't that those were new experiences for me. It was that I had known the experience and had the experience, but I didn't have language to talk about what was going on. And so when I got that language, to me, that's incredibly empowering because I do think if you can't name or put language to a problem, then you certainly can't address it in any way.
Yeah.
So I bet that's really powerful, especially for those trainees.
Yeah. As it happens, other chapters in that collection were taking a similar position. And some of the feedback was, I wished I'd had this when I was training. It would have helped be more open and so on. So Lizette Nolt, she became more open about her experience as well. So I'd been open. And so we took that risk together. And I wrote this with Barbara on supervision called relational integration. And we used CMM in there. And we shared a lot of our history and things like this. So I'm doing that more, taking that risk and hoping that as a trainer, I always think that I don't expect trainees to do something that I wouldn't be prepared to do myself.
Absolutely.
And so often this is the topic today, or this is what we're going to, and I will give a personal example. I will take the lead by showing a willingness to share, not I'm sitting here and you share and I keep quiet. It's not that kind of relationship.
Right. It's the vulnerability begets vulnerability. Yeah. Well, it sounds like you have found this relationship to storytelling of understanding that when you are able to be vulnerable and take that risk to share your stories, that allows other people to come into that space as well. So yes, I think we've already, gotten into your story a little bit, but I would love to just ask still, because I do think it's ever changing. What is the story that you tell about yourself? currently?
The story.
A story, the story. Who are you? Who is John Burnham?
Well, I clinically work in the National Health Service and young people's mental health inpatient unit, and I devote my time mainly to eating disorders. So over the years, I've worked there since January 1977 as my main kind of work base, but I've also worked at KCC in London and other places around the country on a kind of visiting basis. But I work mainly now in multifamily therapy, which is where we get up to 6 to 8 families, all struggling against the influence of anorexia nervosa and other eating disorders. And we have meetings, and I used to do it face to face, but now we do it online, and it's a very moving kind of work and really rewarding to see how the community that is built up between the families is such an important resource. And we have what we call graduate families who've been through the program. The young person's left the unit and transferred back into the community. And the families, including the young people, are willing to come back and talk to the people who are currently in the program. We've got about 14 families who do that now, and it really is fantastic. So that's what I do clinically. And I work with sometimes 1 or 2 families individually. I teach on the MSc still. I used to be head of systemic training, but I still work on the program, teaching and supervising. I run the supervision program with Rabina Singh, who's joined me this last year to co-lead it. So I'm travel around and write. I've written about 5 or 6 publications in the last 2-3 years.
You've been busy.
So busy.
Well, that's incredible. What is it for people who don't know what is the supervision program? What does it mean to be a supervisor in your setting?
It means that your ability to do live supervision, to watch somebody as they're working with an individual, couple, or family, and to intervene as the session's in progress, which is a very, very tricky process.
I bet.
It can be ever so helpful to intervene in the middle of things, and it can be ever so unhelpful.
Right.
If you pop a question through or something like that, then somebody might say that, I just didn't know what to do, and just asking that question was helpful to move it along and so on. Or I was just about to do that.
Right. A little too eager.
Yeah, so it's quite a skill, but then to do supervision of people in all sorts of different contexts, both as systemic psychotherapists, but also psychiatrists or psychologists, people in other disciplines. It's interesting. Family therapy supervision is the supervision of a particular method of work. Okay. Systemic supervision is an orientation of the supervisor. So it doesn't require to be a family. You're looking at the significant relational system in which the supervisor is embedded. And you're not trying to do their work. You're trying to help them to situate themselves in their work. So systemic supervision, I think, is different level of abstraction from family therapy supervision.
Yeah.
It's interesting that, because when you write stuff and teach, people create a story about themselves. And I'm not sure I have a story. Certainly I don't have the story. One of the ways I think about that is when students ask me something, and I'll say, well, why wouldn't you think that I would be worried about that as well? Or why wouldn't you think I would have difficulty? Or why wouldn't you think this about me? And they say, because you're John Burnham. And while I take that as some mark of appreciation,
right,
and sometimes respect, and appreciate that, I will often say, I don't think I know the John Burnham that you know.
Right.
I don't see myself through the same lens. I know.
Yeah.
I know other things about me.
Right. That's a good response.
And my daughters tell a different story about me than you might tell about me. And
Right.
some of them might overlap, but some of them will be different. I often credited with being very humorous, and I do workshops on humor, and I use humor a lot. And that's come from humor as a survival thing in childhood.
Right.
In very difficult, conflictual, sometimes physically violent situations, or potentially physically violent.
Mm-hmm.
If you can say something funny, it often dissolves tension.
Yes.
People laugh instead of fight and being cross and things like that. So I learned that early on. So I don't know whether the context made me or I made the context or some kind of
That's a very interesting question. Yeah.
typical relationship there. But I use it. And it's often given credit for that. We really love that humor in this and that and the other and so on. But sitting with my middle daughter one evening, and she was saying something, and I made a humorous crack.
Mm-hmm.
And she looked at me very kindly, but very seriously, and said, "Dad, you make a joke out of everything."
Mm.
And that was a moving moment for me because she said it kindly. She didn't say it critically.
Yeah.
And she does have that ability to be able to address some very serious things, but in a kind way.
Mm.
And I think that makes it easier to hear. I have a model called PPRR, Problems and Possibilities, Resources and Restraints.
Mm.
And what I do there is to put something in the middle and ask, what problems might this give rise to? What problems might this resolve? What possibilities might this, whatever it is, open?
Right.
What possibilities might it close down? How and when is this a resource? How and when is this a restraint? So that I was putting them into the different quadrants. But when I did that, it kind of, say, hope, you might put that in as a resource and possibilities. But hope can be a restraint sometimes. If people keep hoping for something that isn't going to happen, that rise of hope and then the crash, rise of hope and then the crash can be a restraint to kind of accepting things as they are, not hoping for things that can't be. When you love somebody who doesn't love you, is that hope can be a real restraint to you to accepting the possibility of accepting things as they are. So when I put humor in the middle, my daughter helped me to put how and when is this a resource? How and when is the restraint? And that led me to move out of the story of myself as always humorous to sometimes thinking of a humorous response, but not saying it.
That's a really incredible way to think about things, because not all of our experience or the emotions like hope or love that they're not so one-sided as we think they are. I think that's really helpful.
Like blame. Blame is usually put in as a problem and a restraint. Adopt a non-blaming approach as an absolute. But if you put blame in the middle, you can say, when and how is it a resource?
Right.
And sometimes when families have been blaming each other, I've said, it may be not obvious to me, but how is and when is blaming helpful to you? And they said it's helpful if it helps people to take responsibility. A boy has said, your mum's been blaming you for the abuse that you did to your sister. How is that useful to you or not useful? And he said, it's helpful if she's clear that it was my fault. When she begins to say, well, maybe it was your sister should have said this, maybe. He says, when she says that, that's not helpful. It's much more helpful if she's clear that it was my fault. And that helps me to work on being different.
Interesting.
So blame was a resource. So I don't think it's up to therapists to decide.
Yeah.
What's what. You'd always put it in the middle and ask those questions.
Great questions to ask.
So that's who I am at the moment.
Yes. Yeah.
Somebody who tried to create models, and I used the problems, possibility, resources, restraint in conjunction with CMM.
Mm-hmm.
Problem, run it up the side of the hierarchy, and then see how is this a problem at each of these levels? What's the possibilities at each of these levels? I've adopted, combined, developed a relationship between the models.
Yeah, those seem to be complementary to each other.
Yeah.
I asked the question of what's the story you're telling about yourself, or what is your story, or tell me your story, knowing that there's not one story, there's not a story, and that, I could ask many different questions of what's the story you tell about yourself, but what's the story your daughter tells about yourself or your colleagues tell about you. But I think it is interesting the way people choose to respond, because it's easy to maybe to talk more definitively about other people or things outside of yourself. But I think it's a really good ability to be able to say, to know yourself and to be able to speak about what is true for you and to tell your story, not saying, oh, I need someone else to validate this or confirm this for me, but I know it to be true about myself. I feel similarly to you that I'm lucky that I get to study all of these different models and tools that aren't restricted to the professional side of my life, that I also get to apply for myself and increase the quality of my relationships and my communication through those.
Yeah.
Well, since you brought up CMM, maybe we could just jump into that, and you could tell us the story of how you first encountered CMM and the role it's had in your life, your professional and maybe your personal life, if it's shown up there.
1982, I think, was the time, in Kensington in London, a church hall, 2 or 3 day workshop organised by an organisation called City Centre, which Peter Lang and Ros Draper were running, which was a independent therapy organisation. But at the very beginning, they were emerging, and they organised this workshop. I don't know how they made contact. So Barnett Pierce and Vernon Cronin give this presentations about it, and then I think on day 2, a family come in, and my colleagues B.B. Speed and Philippa Seligman, the late Philippa Seligman, did an interview with this family. B.B. can't remember this. She says, I can't remember doing that. I said, yeah. Really
sticks with you, though. Sticks with you.
And so they did an interview that evening before the next day's workshop. Barnett and Vernon analysed that interview. Next day, they presented that interview. We went theory, then we went practice. Then we took that practice and put it into their theory. And so that was really important and impressive, the way they did that. And it made the theory not come to life. That's right. Become a living thing. Yeah. So yes, you can use it. I saw that interview and I've seen how they think about it. And that's so helpful.
Yeah.
To be able to think about that. And took me beyond my initial impressions of and then they explained, I think they did a strange loop with it and so on.
Yep.
So that was my first encounter with it. And I think I fell for it.
Yeah.
Then. And about them as people, they are approachable to see them. They did that in the evening at the party that we were at. And you usually get presenters who enjoy themselves and have done a day's work and things, but you saw them continue to work at it. Yeah. And I think that fits in with the work ethic from my working class background, which fitted for me. They kept on working, and the next day that they came, I was really impressed by all that.
Oh, absolutely. A number of the people I've talked to were able to first encounter CMM straight from Barnett and Vernon, and I just think must be such a cool experience. I was never able to interact with Barnett Pierce before he passed away. I was, again, newer to this theory, but we talk about him so much, and I get to read his work. And I just think that he seemed to have such an inspiring presence to people. Yeah.
And he was very kind. I wrote a paper called Approach, Method and Technique, which has been quite popular on courses as a framework.
Mm-hmm.
And I sent him that, and he wrote me which I've still got the letter.
No.
He wrote me a really positive, encouraging, and that was one of my first papers that I'd ever written.
Wow.
So that was in 1992. I published that, but he was so positive about it. So I was really pleased with how they did that.
Mm.
I also, in doing Strange Loops, I would work at them and so on. And I said to Vernon Cronin once when he was over, I said, Vernon, can you get all the Strange Loops to close? He said, oh, no, some just another. Oh, why didn't you spend so much time? But I thought that was probably a good investment. If he'd said not all of them closed, I probably would have given up earlier on working with some. And then I think another main influence of mine, Carl Tom, he took on CMM and used it and analysed it. So my development was supported by somebody who I really admired taking it on and validated that. So I used that a lot. And I wrote about it in a book I wrote in 1986 about using it. So I was taken with it.
Yes.
Straight away.
And how has it continued to show up? How do you get to use it in your work or in your life?
Well, I don't know if you use this term in the States, cheeky.
Cheeky, yeah.
I'm a cheeky therapist, a cheeky trainer, and I'm a cheeky student. So Vernon said to me one night, he says, the levels are not fixed in name, number, or order. So you sometimes learn it in a particular way, and in different cultures, those levels will be changed around. Sometimes somebody's self-story is at the highest level.
Yeah.
And they go against their culture in their life. They say, I'm stepping out of that and doing something different. So I took that as freedom to play around with it. And so I've renamed some of the levels and reordered them, redescribed them. So added levels, I took that as freedom to do that. So the culture, I've split into culture and society.
Mm-hmm.
And the distinction I make, people might make different distinctions, but
right.
Culture is the broadest frame in which we live, the patterns that we exist in, the rituals that we adopt, the freedoms and restrictions that we have. And every culture elevates certain truths or practices, they elevate certain ideas or practices to the level of truth or law.
Mm-hmm.
That to me is a society with law courts, schools, universities. The buildings in some ways show what a particular culture appreciates. Churches. But whenever I go to a place, I sometimes ask the taxi driver, I said, on the way to the hotel or something, can you take me past some buildings that you think are particularly important in your city? And I said, make it a trip, and some take you to churches. The number of churches and cathedrals that they have that are important. Some take you to universities, physical manifestations of values that are important in a culture. In Sweden, they call the hospitals the new cathedrals. The people, that's where what they believe in. Universities can be thought of the same.
Yeah, that's fascinating.
In the city that I come from, Newcastle, the football ground is on a hill. And they call it the cathedral on the hill, where people go to worship.
Right.
So that culture and society, so looking at the culture, the broader patterns, but the society, what the values of any culture raise to the level of truth or law. And then it had family story, or originally it had family myth.
Mm-hmm.
And I've changed that to stories about significant relationships, which is more expansive
Right.
than family.
Right.
Family's one significant relationship. It's not the only.
Yes. And people might have different experiences with family.
So I might ask somebody if they're talking about something, I say, who do you go to talk about this to? Now, I used to say, who in your family do you talk most to?
Mm.
So that was restricting it to family. Now I say, who do you go to talk about? Who's the first person you rang up to tell about? So who did you go around to tell, or who did you think to tell? And it might be family or a friend or a neighbor or somebody. So what's the significant relationship here in relationship to this? And so some people, I'll say, what are the things that you would never tell your family? But who would you tell about things that you would never tell your family?
Yeah.
So stories about significant relationships made it more expansive and inclusive and easier for people to answer.
I can see that.
Instead of life script, which seems singular, I say self stories or stories about self.
Mm-hmm.
So those stories might be stories, what you're doing now, stories you tell about yourself,
right?
Stories that other people tell about you. Those are included. Life script seems to be a bit, at that time, I thought it was a bit narrow.
Yes, so, singular.
So I played around and renamed and presented it as coming from CMM, but with my take on it.
I think that's wonderful. The language that I've heard talking to enough people involved in the CMM Institute is that the goal is to be CMM-ish. Let it expand and grow and, be evolving. And that seems very CMM-ish to me.
Yeah. I still use the hierarchy. So I refer to it as a heterarchy.
What does that mean to you?
So I got it from Joyce Scaife, who was a student on our course. And she, in her dissertation, had found this term. And a hierarchy is more fixed. The boss is the boss. The workers are the workers. The managers are the managers. And a family tree is a family tree. That's the order in which they occurred biologically. And a heterarchy, I think it comes from radical feminism, or it's related to, I don't think heterarchy comes from, but that when a group faces an issue or a problem or a set of circumstances, a leader who has some knowledge and abilities in this emerges from the group as the leader in relationship to this task. And they become the leader because of their skills, their knowledge. When that task is over, that person goes back into the group. And they meet another task. So a heterarchy is an organization that might be clear in relationship to that task. Yeah. But in relationship to another task, somebody else might lead. So the organization in that moment is clear. We're taking the lead from you. We are da-da-da-dum. And that's not to say that people can't contribute ideas. But I think that's the heterarchy that is a useful way to think about the levels. Sometimes an episode is so significant, it influences everything else. It influences how you think about your position in your culture, what you think about your religion, what you think about your life, that episode. Yep. And it might change things in that way, that implicative influence. So I played around with that. That helped me to develop something I call the actually not knowing position. Okay. Arlene Anderson said we should take a not knowing position. Even if we know stuff, we shouldn't use that as a basis. We should always be curious and explore. Right. That's good. Then the second not knowing position was when I worked with Queenie Harris, psychiatrist, Indian woman, Christian, and we're very different, but we worked together for 25 years. When Queenie worked with Indian families, sometimes they got frustrated with her curiosity. Interesting. They said something like, we knew we had to explain this to the white doctors, but we thought you might know something about this.
Interesting.
And so that was problematic. And then we developed for Queenie and then myself with white families, or any family that you had some similarities with, and they had expectations based on that similarity. The Queenie would say, that you might think that I would know something about these situations that you're talking about, but I'm going to ask you some questions that make it seem like I don't.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm doing that to make sure we're talking about your experience of these events and not mine.
Mm-hmm.
I do have experience of this, but I'm going to ask you some questions as if I don't.
Right. That seems very CMM-ish to me as well, with the meaning being attached.
Yeah. And it was a mystery that they couldn't understand the questions. So that was giving so as if not knowing position. So that allowed you to acknowledge your knowledge, but think this may not be the same as yours. So that was the second kind of a not knowing position. Then the actually not knowing position is that, say, in an exercise to help people to detach themselves, not be restricted by their knowledge of the content of what people are saying, and help the person to process their experience using CMM.
Mm-hmm.
I would ask you to think of something, and the students are working on this, to think of something that you have enjoyed you've been pleased with in the last. It could be something problematic, but in an exercise, I usually something that you've been pleased with in the last month or so. Okay. It doesn't have to be the world's most fantastic thing. So you would choose something, but I ask you not to tell me what it is. Mm. So I'm going to talk to you about this, but it's not with the idea of, I'm not trying to find out. I'm not trying to get you to tell me. I'm not trying to work it out what it is. I'm really not interested in that. I'm interested in the process. Mm. So I'd ask, were you alone when this happened? Did you plan for it? Did it happen spontaneously? When it happened, how long did it last? How long did it seem? What did it tell you about yourself? Who did you tell? If there were some people in your culture here and listening to this, what might they be inspired about by knowing about this? Who would question it? Who would be more skeptical? So I'm using that and not knowing what that happened, but helping them to explore the experience. Mm. And people have said, when I've said, you don't have to tell me what it is, they've chosen something that's been important to them, and they're freer not to have to say to explore. So using CMM as a structure helps you to organize your not knowing and helps a person to experience things that happen to them. That happened, I used that first in sexual abuse, when some young woman said, I don't want to say what's happened. Yeah. I thought that was because of my gender. And I said to one young woman, you don't have to talk to me. It might be difficult to talk to me as a man. You can talk to one of my female colleagues. And one young woman said, it's nothing to do with you being a man. Mm-hmm. I don't want to tell anybody this. Yeah. I don't want to tell anybody what actually happened. And so it was in that moment, I said, I think I have a way of helping you to talk about it without what happened. Do you want to try that? And she said, okay. So I began to explore the influence on our friendships, what she hoped our family would say to her, who responded in a way that made her glad she told, who responded in a way that made her regret that she told, and so on. So that exploring like that.
Yeah, you really open up to just because someone doesn't want to talk about it or doesn't know how to talk about it yet, you can still help walk them through that processing and re-examining and trying to understand. And that's really cool.
That's a good way to walk them through it. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Outside of your work as a systemic therapist, what else are you passionate about?
Passionate about as a systemic therapist, or just passionate outside my work?
Outside of your work, I can tell that your work is a very important part of your life and who you are. But I think a traditional question that people ask when meeting each other, or trying to get to know someone, oh, what do you do?
Okay.
And we understand that means what's your job, but I want to stay away from just defining you by your job. So outside of your profession, I'd love to know what are other things that you're passionate about, family activities.
Yeah. Well, I'm a grandfather now, and I really passionate about to have as much involvement and time with my granddaughter. And I have 3 daughters, and I'm married to a woman after, I think it's nearly 40 years now. And we got a camper van a year ago or so when the lockdown happened. We're keen to do that, though we still both get so preoccupied with work that we don't use it enough. But
sure.
So I'm keen, but not very good at doing other things. But I suppose individually, I'm an active triathlete. I've been a lifelong runner, and then about 10 years ago, I changed from running to triathlons, and so I had to relearn to swim. And that's great because I'm mixed with people who have nothing to do with my work.
Yeah.
Nothing. And they talk about life in quite a different way sometimes.
Yeah.
Some of them are exciting and interesting. Some of them are a bit difficult.
Sure.
And so I compete for Great Britain. I train a lot for that. Swimming, biking and running. So I'm passionate about that. And the competitive side of it was important to begin with, and that's becoming less so now. There's the enjoyment of the activities itself and the social groups that you mix with and things like this. And the places, we're going to Bilbao.
Yeah.
We're having a holiday there. And before, when I was going to things, the competition was the important thing, and the other stuff wasn't. But now we're going for a holiday, and I'm doing a duathlon in the middle of it. So I'm relaxed about it now.
That's good.
My wife's art I'm interested in. She shifted out of work gradually, and I haven't. And she does art, and she has a room in our house, the room above this room, in which there are loads of paintings all in that room. I don't know anything about art, but I really like her stuff. Really do.
Yeah.
And so I'm passionate about getting her stuff out of the attic and into the house.
Yeah.
And so a project. She's a bit shy about it, but
sure.
I feel passionate about that. I'm in things outside of work.
Yeah. That's
but
good.
I'm still very busy with work.
Yeah. What does it mean to you to be a systemic therapist? Maybe as a literal definition for people who don't know what is a systemic therapist, but then what is special to you that you enjoy?
God, that's a good question. And I know that's a trips off the tongue. People say, that's a really great question. But how I define a good question is I don't have an immediate answer to it, and I really want to answer it. That's what I define a good question as. If you ask a family a question, a reflexive question would be something that they can't answer immediately, but they want to answer it. So systemic therapist, people ask questions like that.
Yeah.
They ask questions that people don't have an immediate answer to, but the person wants to answer it. It's important. Creating an answer to that question may be of some benefit, may extend their thinking and so on. I'll tell you about a family I just worked with last night where the young one was very upset with me. And we'd had a meeting. I have to keep this confidential, just describe the process from my point of view. She was upset, crying about the outcome of a meeting. She was angry at me for some of the things I'd said. Her parents were there, her mother was consoling her. So I have a phrase that in that moment, what it means to me to be a systemic therapist is trying to turn a crisis for the therapist into an opportunity for the client.
Mm.
How can I respond in a way that turns this to their benefit, not be defensive, not try to justify, not try to, well, sometimes I do, but not to make that the prime interest.
Yeah.
But to turn this, what could be a crisis for me, into an opportunity.
Sounds hard to do.
It is. And I don't always live up to it. One of the things I think a systemic therapist tries to turn a crisis for the therapist or the service into an opportunity for the client when they criticize. It's easy to work with clients who are cooperative, and not easy, but relatively so. But when clients don't like what you do, when they challenge what you do, when what you've done with the best of intentions has the worst of effects, how do you respond to that in a way that keeps the therapeutic space open? Now, I know other therapists will do that as well, but I'm talking about from our point of view. It means staying relevant. The older I get, the more I worry about being relevant, especially to young people. But I think I use my age. I've been doing this for a long time. And so I'm in the social grace of appearance. When people come in and look, I think, what is this old guy, this old white, know about this? So I'll make the most of that. I'll talk about tactic, and make deliberate errors so they laugh at me. And that's in humor, I think the first person that should be laughed at is the therapist. And the first person you should laugh at is yourself. And I think that's how you introduce humor, to laugh at myself and invite them to laugh. And I think that softens the approach. And I think the systemic therapists, we've always been credited with introducing the unexpected. So one woman was crying after a disappointment that she wasn't going home as soon as she hoped. And I said, this may sound strange, but I'm glad that you're crying. I'm glad to see that you're so upset. Now, that's unexpected. You would expect to be sympathetic, to you're sorry, to apologize, to try and comfort. And so I found myself saying that. And she said, well, that's going to take some processing, isn't it? And I said, yes. I said,
yeah.
Do you know why? Why might I be pleased? I know it sounds strange, believe me, but why might I be pleased that you were so upset at hearing that news today? And then she generated 5 reasons why I might be pleased to see that she was upset. I had 2.
Yeah.
By not giving mine and saying, why might I be? And generating curiosity. Chekine said to try and generate a curiosity in the mind of the therapist. I also think it's important to generate curiosity in the mind of the client.
Absolutely.
It might be about you and what you do.
Yeah.
So she generated those. And she went out still upset, but she had a different story about that upset. I didn't try to stop her from being upset. It was entirely understandable, appropriate she was upset. Her hopes had been dashed in that meeting. Had a different story about being upset. She was upset because she wanted to do these things, because she was ready to go home, because she was confident in her family were ready to have her home again. Her friends were missing her and she was missing her friends. She had a life ready to go back to. That's why I'm upset. So I didn't try to stop her from being upset, but to create a different story around it. There's other things about being a systemic therapist, but I think that's part and parcel.
Yeah, I think that's really incredible and a really good skill to be able to have that. You have to practice it, being able to lean into places of discomfort or things that are not the easy option, but maybe, ultimately the better option for you. And I think that's part of what I want to encourage with this podcast is developing those kind of skills for people, giving them the language to be able to talk about the things they're experiencing. And so I wonder personally in your work, how you approach those complex moments of dissonance or tension, like complex ideas or feelings in spaces. How do you lean into those?
That's another really good question. It's a question I've thought about a lot. And one of the things I think is that thinking beautiful thoughts do not necessarily lead you to do beautiful things. The theories are fine, but as therapists, we have to do something with it. We can't just talk a lovely theory. Theories can help to shift us. I remember Barnett Pierce saying that he thought theorists were the therapist for therapists.
Interesting.
He said that we would give you therapists a new theory or a different take, and you get excited, he said. And then you turn it into practices and questions and things like this. He said after a while you get bored with it. So we have to come along with a new thing. Oh, what do we do with this? So he says, we keep you excited, and then you turn what we do into something practical. So I have some things about that relationship between the esoteric and the practical. And I think coming from a working class background, and my particular family story is I wanted to be good at something. Didn't want to be a generalist. And I was very purist to begin with. When I was doing something wholeheartedly, and I practiced and practiced and practiced till I could do it well. And so it wasn't enough for me to have people saying things, I'm curious about this and I'm wondering about that, which is a lovely stage. And then what are you going to do with that curiosity? How are you going to translate that into something that you can do? People in a way that might have a chance of them changing things. Let's go with CMM. So one phrase I have is think theory and talk ordinary. Now, ordinary is ordinary for the people that you're working with, which means so there's no a singular ordinary way. If I was talking to you, what's ordinary to you might be CMM. So I could talk to you in CMM language.
Yeah, in a way it's accessible for people. Yeah.
So I'm talking a language that you understand. If I'm talking to somebody else who has no idea about CMM, I listen to their language and I think CMM, but I'm talking in a way that. So this couple I was working with where physical violence, a man had been violent towards a woman. At one stage in the therapy, this wasn't the first session, but I had them stand up in the middle of the room and had him raise his fist, ready to punch. And she was standing. And we talked about this and she was okay to do this. And to have him like this, I said, this is at the point where you could decide to punch or not to punch. You can still decide. This is at that point in the process. At this point, let's imagine, so they're both standing up in the middle of the room. Let's imagine in that corner of the room, there are 10 people, 10 men from a culture that you regard as your own. So I wasn't saying what culture he was from. He could have all sorts of different people in his culture. So let's imagine 10 men from a culture that you regard as your own, and you turn to them and say, shall I hit or shall I not hit? So in that moment, I'm collapsing culture as an abstract concept into this decision.
Yeah.
And I said, so what would they say? And he said, they would tell me to hit. I said, why would they tell you that? He said, any woman that speaks to me like that can expect, okay, so that's what you think they would say. That's what you think. Not necessarily what they would say, but what you think. And I said, a couple of sessions ago, when we were talking about how you see yourself as a person at the self-story level, didn't say that to him, but you regarded yourself as a leader, not a follower. He says, yeah. I said, I'm a leader, not a follower. I said, So I'm wondering why you would follow what the other men would do. But when you think of yourself as a leader, why are you following what other men would do? So that's what, in systemic terms, you're talking about a contradiction with therapeutic potential.
Yes.
So what if you were to turn to those men and lead about not hitting? Because you said you don't want to hit.
Yeah.
You find yourself hitting and then regretting. So you don't want to. How would you lead them? They may not follow you, but how would you? So that's thinking theory and talking ordinary, turning something from abstract concepts to them. Then what about your children in that corner of the room? And you ask them, what would they tell you? So you're bringing the outside world into, using the different levels, but by people sitting in a corner of the room, by the children in the corner of the room, by bringing all sorts of different things. What about you as a younger man standing in that corner? And you ask, how would they help you to make a decision? So we're talking about decisions. And then he said his arm was beginning to ache. And I said, no, keep it there, keep it there. And he said his shoulder was aching for quite a few days after that. And I think that reminded him of the embodied experience. So thinking, the abstract thinking and so on, and the practical ways, how you role plays. I still role play on my own. And if I've got something, I think it's ethical not to do or say something for the first time with a client, if you can. So if I'm going to ask a particular question, the kind of questions that I was just saying then, I know this is going to sound strange, but I was quite pleased to see you upset.
Yep.
I rehearse asking that kind of question. And then what I do is to imagine different responses. What if she responds like this? What will I say? What if she responds like this? What will I say? I try to imagine multiple responses and then try to think, how might I do this? With the intent of having her be glad that she responded, not regret. So how can I maintain therapeutic potential, whatever she says? So I'm ready in that way. She might always respond in ways which I don't understand.
Right.
But I try to prepare myself.
Yeah. I think what you're getting at is something, I had a conversation in another episode with Alex Jaggiello, who was one of the fellows for the CMM Institute. And she did a project and she had some really great language around this process of starting with imagination, then genuine inquiry, and then embodiment. And that seems to be what you're talking about too, where you do have to start from this place of imagination. It's a really important step to let yourself spend time imagining the outcomes or imagining what could be. Because if you are given these narratives or these stories that you've internalized, like your client you just talked about has these deeply internalized patterns or messages that he's received, forgetting that he has a choice, you know? And so if you can imagine a different way of being, that's huge to begin with. And then you bring in the genuine inquiry, which is the curiosity, you know, and the gentle kind of leading or bringing other people into the conversation or asking questions of yourself. And then you embody what you imagined. And so if you have shied away from leaning into potentially uncomfortable situations, even if they're moments that could bring about growth, but you imagine yourself leaning in and begin to realize that you could be making a different choice. And then embody that. I think that's a wonderful way to be able to approach moments of dissonance where it's really easy to want to turn back.
I'll show you an exercise that we do with the students and talk about embodiment. All of us have got kind of responses from people that we're working with, either clients or supervisees, that frees us, that kills our imagination. They don't intend that.
Right.
Something that they say just freezes us, you know, and we can't imagine. So what do you do to generate, to be able to respond to this? And say if we were working together and I chose something that triggered me, froze me or something like that. Like, say, for example, if you said to me, so people often choose, I'm not finding this session very helpful. Well, we all have something or several things. So I would ask you to say something like, I'm not finding this very useful at all. You say this to me, and then I just respond and say something, right? Then I get up and walk around the chair, sit down, and you just say that same thing again. And I have to develop a different response. I can't Then I get up and I do this
again and again
5 times. And after a while, they start to go beyond what and they take some risks. You say, this is a safe place to experiment. You can be rude back.
Right.
You could say something awful. You could say something that you feel. And then we look at those, and sometimes when people say something that's not very nice, but there's something in there that they could use,
Yeah.
Say, for example, one person responded to that by saying, well, I'm not enjoying it much either. Now, you wouldn't say that, but you did say, I was feeling that too, that you weren't finding this useful. I was feeling that. This conversation didn't seem so useful. So she was authentic to what she was feeling, but said it in a way that it connected with what the person said, validated what they said, but joined in with that feeling. So they were in it together. And so you do this, and it can be quite playful, quite fun. We had one person, a person who found it very difficult to loosen up as a therapist. And we asked them to take themselves off screen and dance, that there's nobody watching.
Yeah.
And so we did that and said, sit down when you're ready. And so she sat down, and she's a little freer in the conversation. We did that. A really funny thing happened with this rounded chair thing. And before session, we were helping a therapist with this, and she was doing the rounded chair thing. She went in to do this session. It was a mother who she found very difficult to relate to. And about 20 minutes in, the therapist got up and walked around her chair in the session.
Oh my gosh.
Oh my gosh. I said, I didn't mean this. Anyway, she sits down, and the mother says, what's that? What are you doing? And she said, oh, we've been doing this as an exercise that when I couldn't think of anything to say when you were saying that, if you get up and walk around the chair, it helps you to think differently. So that's why I did it. And I said, okay. And then they went on. Then about 10 minutes or so later, the mother got up and walked around her chair.
Oh my gosh.
To her daughter and sat down and said, this works.
Oh my. That's incredible.
And that was where we put practice into theory. This walking around the chair just gives you, I made that as a spontaneous thing.
Yeah.
So we do it a lot. And then how do we theorize this? And Sean's reflection in action, where you do something in the moment that can change the moment.
Yeah.
Think about it afterwards. And that walk around the chair, it doesn't work if you just say, think of something different.
Yeah.
Think of something different. The walking around the chair just gives you that moment to reflect and to reposition yourself. So,
pull yourself out of the moment enough to see it. Yeah, see it in a new perspective.
Yeah.
Okay, so kind of off of this conversation, it seems that you have been practicing for a very long time, have a lot of knowledge. People are learning a lot from you, whether you're teaching or supervising or they're your clients. But I wonder how you feel that you've learned from your clients, your students, or the people you supervise.
You've got some good questions, haven't you?
I'm glad you think so.
I'm glad you said learning. Somebody said to me, you enjoy teaching. I said, well, no, I enjoy people learning. Because you can teach without people learning, and that's
that's true. That's true.
Not so enjoyable. I can stand up and teach all day, but if people aren't learning,
right, that's a great distinction. Yeah,
the enjoyment is to see them learn. So what I've learned is, well, I'm sorry.
It's okay.
Whenever I talk about the effect the clients have had on me, I don't know exactly what it is, but it's difficult to say if I enjoyed my work. It seems difficult when you're working with people who are suffering to say that you enjoy that. I don't know what word accurately describes her. Enjoying isn't. Moved. And I think some things go beyond linguistic language.
Yeah.
And it's better represented by just how you are, how you respond in that. But especially working in patients, you see people who are suffering quite a bit. And I've learned, that the resoluteness of people in the face of great challenges and how people can overcome, even when you think, I'm not so sure that this is going to work out.
Mm-hmm.
I haven't thought that a lot, but I have thought about it at times. And one person who I thought wasn't going to make it, and she went from our unit to another unit, which was even more. We have a semi-secure unit, and she went to a unit that was really secure. And when she left, we said, what do you want to take from here? And she says, I don't want to be forgotten. So a nurse and myself continued to visit her to show she wasn't forgotten and so on. And she got in a really bad way, and I thought, she's going to die here.
Wow.
And she turned it around and continued to keep in touch with her and her family. And she's traveling the world now, and she's a paramedic, and she won a national award for Paramedic of the Year. And so working in one place for a long time, I've had the benefit of that learning.
Yeah.
If you go and work somewhere for a year or 2 years, you see a slice. And like the graduate families I was telling you about before, multi-family therapy, mm-hmm. where they come back and we see how they've developed. And one young person had a YouTube channel for her singing. And then when she left our unit, she uses it to tell her story about recovery.
Wow.
And now we use her YouTube channels in the program.
Wow.
Some of our PowerPoint presentations.
Mm-hmm.
And there she is, talking about the physical effects.
Wow.
What it does to your body and things like this. And so the young people are listening to her, yeah. and the parents are listening to her. I hardly ever use the word awe. I really am critical of the Americans for turning the word awesome into meaningless. They use it so everything's awesome. Oh, that's awesome. That's brilliant. I really am annoyed the way they do that.
But real awe.
Real awe happens not so much. That's why it's awe.
Yes, yes.
So I've learned from her how to talk about, how to use her experience and so on. So we use that, the graduate families that come back. And I've learned how, just recently, I was trying to help parents not keep looking at change in their child as the only indicators of change, to look to yourself first. When your child says you've been calmer, they'll feel a bit more confident. When they see you being more skilled, they'll feel a bit more competent. So, and then a mother and daughter came back and said to the young woman, when did you decide to change? And she says, it's not like that. It doesn't happen as a revelation one day. She said, her and her mother said, it's like grains of sand. Bits and bits until the weight builds up and builds up by lots of little things happening. And then you all move along together. She said, it's not just a young person deciding to eat again. Well, a young person thinks and decides is important, but it's not the only part of this. She says, grains of sand. And so I've used that metaphor. But the main thing, is a model that we're going to write about with the person who developed it, a mother who thought of this model to understand her own experience and her daughter's. We're writing that up together.
Wow.
Called APA and AHA. And the AHA is when you're trying to make a decision on your young person eating, you've got to keep them alive, then you've got to get them healthy, then happy, and then achievements. But if you're looking towards the achievements and keeping them happy, you might make decisions that won't keep them alive.
Right. Wow.
I don't like this food. I'm not happy to eat it. Is not the issue.
Mm-hmm.
Right now is you have to eat what you need for your body. All of the time with families, the model that we have now is based a lot on what we've learned from families. I've learned not to be so certain. When I started out as a young therapist, I was pretty clear. I knew what was what and what people should do.
Sure.
I came from a family, my mother's script, she knew what was what and what people should do. And I caught a bit of that. One young man I was working with, she'd been sexually abused and the effects on her had been tremendous about harming herself. She often had to be restrained from harming herself. And I worked with her. There'd be a point in the session, the mantra is about the person who abused is responsible and you're not responsible anyway. That kind of clarity, which is sometimes helpful. And I think that clarity is different from certainty. And I think you can be clear, helpfully clear, but don't let that slip into certainty. And I'd slipped into certainty. And as I was talking, there'd be a point in the conversation where she would go white and she would leave the room. And she would often be going to harm herself. And I didn't know what was going on.
Yeah.
Didn't. And she asked me if I worked with people who abused, which I did. And she'd ask me certain questions and I would be clear with a certainty about blame and responsibility. Because I was certain this would be helpful to her. When that happened, when the session would end like that, I would go back to my room. The nurse would take physical care and we would make another appointment. And this day, I decided not to go. I followed. And two nurses were sitting with her on the bed. And I said to her, what is it? What is it that happens that we talk about that leads you to say this, to do this? What is it? And I was saying it just like that, I think. I said, we've got to know. What is it? And she said, I can't tell you. She said, I know. She said, you would hate me if I told you. You would hate me. And I said, I can guarantee I will not hate you. And I never say those kind of things. I was trained not to say those. I guarantee you I will not hate you. She says, how do you know you don't know what it is? I said, I don't know what it is, but I know me. I know me. And the nurses, they said, we will not hate you. We have heard lots of things. We will not. We can promise that. We can't promise we like what you tell us, but we can promise not to hate you for it. And later on, it came out that she had abused someone as well. And the whole thing of this, the complexity of it, that she had participated in the sexual abuse of somebody else as well as being abused. So when we were talking about perpetrators and it's their responsibility, we were talking to that aspect of her experience without her knowing. And that certainty that we had about that, intending that certainty to be therapeutic for her, it was being anti-therapeutic. So that kind of experience taught me to be clear, but not slip into certainty. So those kind of things were really helpful. And there have been other people who've helped me with that as well, including colleagues who say, John, you're seeming a bit certain about yourself. Oh, drat. Not again. Yeah, John, again. It's having kind and patient colleagues.
Really helpful. Yeah.
I've learned also that people who seem competent still need help. When people come in our unit and you see some parents who are doing okay and you can neglect the people who seem still have got together. And when you talk to those people, they're holding themselves up. They might have something in their culture that tells them to hold it together and not show. You say, look, with medics who come in, I say, I'm going to treat you like any client. I'm not going to assume that you know, because you have the intellectual knowledge about this, that you know what to do as a parent. And I'm going to treat you like a parent. And am I relieved about that? Others aren't.
Yeah. using the language of CMM, the goal is always to be creating better social worlds. So I'd love to know, what is a better social world for you? What does that look like? And how do you want to get there? How do you feel like you're working towards that?
Inadequately, imperfectly. Sometimes it feels not hard enough. But I'm not a very political person with a big P. I didn't come from that kind of family. I think I think one of the things I've devoted myself to and increasingly do is to make therapy available to people that it wasn't available to before. Mm-hmm. There's a practice I call relational reflexivity that I've written about, is helping the client to create the kind of therapy that they want to receive. So the language, the methods of working, how to make this, use my repertoire. What from my repertoire is it that they want to use? Not what I'm currently excited about. That's the broad principle. It happened first time with family that came on a Friday morning, and you could tell that the sleep was still in their eyes, and the kids' buttons were done up on the wrong fold. One kid was eating his breakfast bar, and they'd been around different ages. And I said, "What do you want to get from coming here?" Which is a regular question. And they said, "This and what do you want to mumble?" And the mother said, "Look, you all ask that. What do we want to get? How do we know what we want to get from you until we know what you can do? Tell me, what can you do?" And I just managed to avoid coming back with a clever question.
Yeah.
And I just started to list the things I could do. I just said, well, I can do sculpting, I can do enactment, I can do circular questions, I can do reflexive, I can do externalization, And the mother stopped me and said, "Oh, no, we were externalized at the last place." No, well, I can do internalized. And I named a few things. And she, "What's that internalized other interview?" And I said, "Well, it's what, if you want to get to know somebody better or feel what it's like to be in that position, I would interview you as that person, as if you were that person, to see how it feels to be that person and get some idea of their experience, And she says, "Well, we've never tried that. Let's give that a go." I said, "Let's go for that." So that's about helping. You have to be reasonably confident and willing to go with something, but you shouldn't feel that you have to do everything that you're asked. I've been asked to do some things which I said no to, so it's not, you're just a puppet.
Sure.
The client's not your puppet and you're not their puppet. So trying to help. So now I use lots of, like in language, of linguistic examples. A lot of therapists like to ask when change happens, when this continues, as a kind of, it's going to continue. So the presumption it will continue. They ask when, not if. Now, I think that's unfair. If somebody's at the if stage, you shouldn't just push them to when. So I say, I'm going to ask you a question, but I'm not sure how to begin it. The question is, when or if this change continues or this change happens, what will it be like? What will you, be pleased about, or how will you use it? So shall I begin that question with when or if? Some people begin it with if. So that's opening a choice for them.
Yep.
My question, their beginning. And in one session, this young woman thought for a while with her family, and she said, when? I was quite pleased. And so I went with that. And then the dad interrupted and said, I think she chose that because that's what she thinks you wanted her to say. And she's a people pleaser. So I stopped and I said to her, is that? She says, well, it's a bit of both. So we invented the word with. WHIF.
Yeah.
So with that happens. You can make words. You shouldn't be restricted by Words are all made up.
Yeah.
So let's make a word that fits your position. Like you asked me about that word, enjoyment of what I do is not the right word. You offered meaningful, but that's not the right. I don't have a word. Maybe sometimes a word will happen, but I certainly want to continue doing what I'm doing. So there's something important, but I haven't found a word yet. Rewarding, life affirming, all of those. But that's making better social worlds. The other thing I'm most recently involved in, I'm part of the Association for Family Therapy, has a diversity working parties and divided into different aspects of social graces: gender, race, religion, class, income. Now I'm a member of the race group and the class group. And in that race group, we're pushing the boundaries for each of us. And one of the things we're doing, I'm in favour of role plays. We've started a series of role plays, and I was in a group one evening. I was the only white person. And so I volunteered to be a white man coming for therapy with issues of racism. His daughter was getting married to a black guy, but she thought that her dad was a bit racist, not so sure about him. And she said, I think you've got to go to a therapist and sort yourself out. Otherwise, I'm not going to invite you to the wedding. So one of the black members of the group was a therapist. The other people were reflecting. I opened myself. It was a role play. I don't have a daughter who's not going to be inviting me to the club.
Right.
But whiteness and maleness, the personal is in any role play. And so we went on with that, and then people reflected. And if you think in CMM terms, you can think of, you might put something at an episode level, racism. Now I would put the same word vertically alongside an episode of racism. If you put the word racism along the side and think, how is this applicable or meaningful at these different levels? Just to understand the episode. So there's racism, and then I put the opposite along the other horizontal. So you might have racism, and then along the other side, anti-racism. Now, I think anti-racism is an important movement, but it has its limitations. It tells you what you're against. It doesn't necessarily tell you what you're for.
Yeah.
Anti that. If I'm anti that, what am I for? And I think people find it easier to change if they also have stop doing that and start doing this.
Yes.
So in that, it's like working with a dad who physically abused his children and being helped by the social workers to amend his ways, stop doing that. And he says, I know what not to do now, but what do I do instead? I was raised like that. What do I do instead?
Yeah.
I coined the term raceful, racist, practiced, and raceful. What do I do that's raceful? Now, I'm at the beginning stage of this, but it's kind of looking for practices that show an engagement with and connection with, willingness, commitment to doing things differently in a way of appreciation, willingness to understand, willingness to entertain different ways of living and things. And so I think Newcastle's monocultural, where I was born, very white, monocultural, not so much now, but pretty much, to Birmingham. And I encountered arranged marriages. What? Couldn't understand that. I was really out of my comfort, my level of understanding. And I began the process of arranged marriages and how they are done with couples who were raised in romantic ideas about marriage, but were disappointed with it. And I would say, in some cultures where they have arranged marriages, there's a concentration on friendship and love grows. It's not necessarily the first thing that you look for, whereas in our culture, you look for falling in love. And so that would be an example of graceful practices, taking something from one culture that isn't your own and looking, how could that add to ours?
Yeah.
Is ours so good? Or could ours do with it? What if we were to use that? So I've said to some couples, how about if you looked at your friendship first and do it in this way that other cultures use to see if a different kind of love can grow from a friendship, doing things to be nice to each other, to be kind to each other. I used that in my daughter's wedding speech. What I got from Queenie Harris, who I worked with for many years, is Indian, and she had a love marriage. But when I talked to other people who had arranged marriages and about that, the different values that they placed on a relationship, at my daughter's wedding, I said, there's the 3 L's in your marriage. First L is lust, what drew you to each other. Second one is love, as you grow and develop. Third one is looking after each other. How do you look after each other, which will help to keep love going? If you don't look after each other, love and lust fade. But looking after each other in the difficult times and so on, that can be important. And that's what I got from talking to other cultures about marriage and what was important. So. Most recently, Parkview Clinic, who has taken my place as head of systemic training. She's an Indian woman, born and raised in this country, but still very connected, speak multiple dialects, and is engaged with her culture in a visible and interesting and informative way. And she doesn't talk about racism a lot, but we were in this conversation. She's Sikh, and she told me about her experiences of walking down the street. And if there's a white person or white family or white group coming towards you, they would expect you to stand to one side and give way to them on their street, in their country. And that was the message in that. And her brother, as they grew up, her brother one day decided not to. And he kept on walking and didn't step aside. And she says that caused some problems, but that's one of the things. She says that racism can happen just like that. There's so many levels collapsed into that.
Mm-hmm.
So when she told me that, I didn't know if I did that or not as a white person, but I deliberately set about noticing when I was walking, who I was walking towards, and deliberately standing aside, especially with a black or Asian. And I got some very interesting responses to that. Surprised. Oh, thank you. So that can happen in very small ways. But how about you?
Oh, for my better social world?
Yes. Yeah.
Oh, wonderful question. I think to answer what I'm doing to get towards a better social world before I tell you what my better social world is really this podcast, is how I see it. Because for me, what I'm so passionate about is that I felt so empowered when I was learning about communication theories or practices. And I thought everybody deserves to know these things. I was only learning those because I decided to study it. And that's such a small percentage of people who are doing that. But don't we all deserve these skills? Because communication and relationships are something we are all always engaged in. And we take for granted that we have communication competency, that we have those skills. And I think for me, the podcast is making something people think to be very abstract, tangible. It's making something that's traditionally been reserved for the academic setting into practice. And it's transforming the language from something that's completely inaccessible for the people that want to use it in their day-to-day life into something that is useful and something that actually makes sense to people and resonates with them. And so I'm very passionate about communication. And so I don't know that everyone will have the same reaction that I do upon learning these skills. But I think it can only do good and improve people's relationship, the quality of their relationships and the effectiveness of their communication if they can understand even a fraction of the patterns that go on. So to me, A better social world involves a lot of vulnerability and authenticity and intentionality around those things specifically. I care about a lot of things. I care very deeply. And I think I learned, especially in my school experience, especially young people, I think it's really easy or tempting to act like you don't care about anything, because that's cool. It's not cool to care about things. That's a vulnerable thing to say, I care about this. And so I realized, I can't make anybody else care. I can't make anybody else have the same experience that I had. I'm not going to convince them. But what I can do is live into it for myself and model it and hope that that's what could make someone care, to see what it could do for themselves.
I love the way you use communication and not just language. So much of what you're talking about resonates with, I think, what I've been talking about. I want to express some appreciation of what you're doing. It's something that's, thinking about my training and the opportunities were open to me and the resources were great. I valued them all. But I think people like yourself and what you're doing is moving things along. Maybe we'll go into a stage where we're resource rich in a way, and people will have difficulty making choices. They'll never be able to watch everything, never be able to listen to everything. And so, but nevertheless, I think we have to risk that happening.
Yeah.
And so I really appreciate what you're doing. I like your tolerance to me talking too much.
Not at all.
It is a fault of mine, but
I've been told that as well about myself, so I always appreciate a chance to listen.
I wrote a paper with a student in a tutorial. She said, "Do I talk too much?" I said, "Yes," and she responded with shock. And I said, "Were you surprised?" I said that. She said, "Yes." I said, "Has anybody else? Have you asked that question to anybody else?" She said, "Yes." I said, "What do they usually say?" She says, "Well, they usually say, 'No, we enjoy what you're saying.'" I said, "Oh, I enjoy what you're saying, but that wasn't the question. The question was, do you talk too much?" And I said, "Yes." I said, "That comes from a person who I talk too much." So
right.
I recognize it.
Yeah, you're in good company.
We went on and we wrote a paper together and published that about, do I talk too much in the conversation?
That's fascinating.
How it influenced both. How did you work on that?
On my listening abilities, my restraint. Yeah. I think especially doing the podcast has been helpful because it's a very intentional listening space. I would say probably in my personal relationships, I struggle more to do that. I'm also someone, I just get excited by a conversation. And so if an idea is sparked in me, I want to say it. And it's hard for me to let those go or let those pass. I don't have to say, I'm not going to save the conversation or say the best thing here. I could just receive what the other person's saying. But the podcast space definitely helps to be an intentional listener.
We do I don't know if you heard of the two concepts, listening to speak and speaking to listen.
We were just talking about that this morning. Those exact words.
Yeah. And we do that in the multifamily therapy with the parents. And we do a role play of that in front of them. In fact, we've done me and Becky Brain, who I run the group with, we've done role plays of interactions between parents and, parent and a child and stuff. And we recorded that so they can watch that.
Have some resources, yeah.
We do a listening to speak and a speaking to listen role play. And the parents say, "Oh, God, that's me." That's me. Or, or that's somebody else. Or, And so we work on how both of them are valuable. It's not one's good.
Yeah.
But like you say about when you get excited by an idea.
Yeah. Yeah, the alternative that I know that's similar but different from what you just described, the speaking to listen and listening to speak, is the just different versions of the listening part, being listening to respond versus listening to understand.
Yeah. My daughter trained me in that and said, "Look, I'm coming to tell you this, not for you to tell me what to do about it.
Yeah.
Just coming to tell you it. So relax. You don't have to fix anything.
Yeah, that's big.
Tell me your view of it. I just want to tell you. Are you ready to listen?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yes. Yeah.
So it is hard work, though.
It absolutely is, but to me, worth it.
It's hard work, especially with people like you and me who have so many interesting things to say.
Yes, I know. So much. Shouldn't everyone want to hear everything I have to say? No.
What's your partner like then?
He also studied interpersonal communication.
Yeah.
So that's very helpful because we have a shared language. He's excited about these things too.
You're a talker, is he? Or a talker?
He is a good listener, and he's more restrained probably if I jump in, and I can't let the ideas pass by. I want to say them. He's probably better at listening to understand, or not listening to speak. We
also teach double listening.
Mm-hmm.
Like Bates in hand, double description.
Mm-hmm.
If you have two descriptions of something, you get a richer view than if you have a singular.
Yeah.
And double listening, we say to the parents that when you hear anger, listen for anxiety.
Right.
When one person gets angry and says they hate you.
Yeah. Hear it differently.
Imagine, listen for anxiety.
Mm-hmm.
And attend to the anxiety. Say something. Don't talk to the anger, talk to the anxiety.
Yeah. Oh, that's really good. Yeah.
It'll be all right. We'll get through this together. I know how to do this. We do teach them to take the expert position.
Yeah.
No matter how you feel, I know how to do this.
Yeah.
My partner, similarly, really good listener. And I think that's how she's taught me a lot. Really has.
Yeah.
If I'm nasty to her, she's never nasty back.
It's a good quality.
It's amazing. It leads you to your own nastiness. You can't.
Yes, do some reflection.
You can't escalate.
Yeah.
I'm nasty to you because you were nasty to me. I'm nasty to you because I was nasty.
Because I was nasty. Yeah. Stops that pattern really quick.
It's interesting about patterns. I was married before. And when we got married, I could continue the old pattern without Alison playing the other part. I could do both parts.
Yeah.
And I would do something and walk out, and she would be stood there. What happened there? And I would realize she hadn't said what I was responding to. I was responding to something that was laid down somewhere else.
Yeah.
It's absolutely fascinating.
Yeah.
Are you going to go and become a therapist, or?
I don't know what my path's going to be. I haven't considered therapy as much, but especially after talking to Barbara and you and a number of others I've gotten to connect with through the CMM about therapy. I think I've done therapy. I've really enjoyed it. And so I know how meaningful it is for me on the other end, because I'm absolutely a verbal processor and appreciate that space incredibly. Yeah. And that feels like if I'm saying my desire is to bring these concepts to people, that feels like a very obvious way to do it. So we'll see what's next for me. I'm definitely planning on returning to school to do a master's degree. Going to school during COVID was a very strange time, so I was feeling very burnt out. I've always enjoyed school. And so I thought if I go straight in from my undergraduate degree to my master's degree, I wouldn't enjoy it. I just want it. And so I thought I need to give myself some time. So either next year I'll go back if I feel ready for that, or wait a while, but that's definitely in my future. I've mainly considered continuing to study communication. Maybe being a professor is down the road for me, but that is a lot of school that I can't think about right now. But again, I feel comfortable saying if that's a little farther down the road, great. If not, that's okay too. I'll see where it all takes me. No, I've really enjoyed this conversation and getting to hear you have very interesting thoughts that are thought-provoking for me. And these kinds of conversations are very life-giving to me. So I appreciate it.
Thank you. I've enjoyed it too.
Okay, that is all for our conversation with John. At the end of each episode, I like to offer some questions to reflect on, which act as a next turn, so the conversation doesn't stop just because the episode does. Today, the questions I would have you think about are, what does it mean to take a not knowing position? How can you change the moment in the moment? And what else can you listen for? I hope these feel like 3 questions that kind of touch on a number of the things that we talked about today. But perhaps there's other things you're reflecting on from this conversation that have stuck with you. I know we touched on truly so much. So you're welcome to reach out to me to share reflections on the questions I've posed or any of your own reflections, your own questions or other ideas as well. You can do that through email, the website, or by commenting on Instagram and YouTube, or by commenting on the CMM Institute Substack under this podcast episode. Links to those places are in the show notes. And those are all great ways to stay in dialogue with me. I'd love to hear your reflections. The reason I invite you to share your reflections with me is to stay in dialogue. Of course, other great ways to do that are to follow the show wherever you listen, leave a rating and review, and share this episode with someone you want to invite into the conversation. One other thing I have to ask of you as we wrap up today is one more way to stay in dialogue. I'm beginning to think about 2025 and the next season of this podcast. And so I've created a survey so that I can hear from you what you've gotten out of the podcast, how you use it, what you're looking to get out of it. I truly want this to be a co-created space. So I'd love to invite you to fill out the survey, which I have linked in the show notes below, and we can continue to make this podcast into something meaningful for all of us. I am supported by the CMM Institute for Personal and Social Evolution. This podcast is just one of many initiatives designed to create space for more conversations that move us toward those better social worlds we hope to create. You can learn more about the CMM Institute and our other initiatives at the links in the show notes. One I will specifically call out today is our Cosmo Activities line of social emotional resources. You can check out all of those for free at www.cosmoactivities.com. Plus, you can use that same link to access our new Substack, which is Cosmo Parenting, the next turn in our Cosmo Activities resources. Go ahead and follow and subscribe over there so that when we start releasing those podcasts in January, you will be getting them in your inbox. Thank you for showing up. Thank you for being curious, and thank you for being a part of this story. I'm Abby, and this has been Stories Lived, Stories Told.